Hi, everyone, and to our recording today. It's all about coercive control in relationships. My name is Chris Bruce with the Bruce Law Firm here in South Florida, and we have the pleasure of being joined by Nina Batista. She is a psychotherapist. She has a private practice down in Boca Raton, so local to a lot of us. Most of her focus is on complex trauma. I've gotten to know more about her and speak to her, and what she really focuses on a lot is where my clients have a lot of need, and that is women that are in controlling relationships and coming to grips with how do you navigate one of those relationships? How do you possibly move on from it? And, Nina also spends time working with children, especially adolescents of people going through leaving one of those relationships. So she kind of has a real holistic view of the issues that this presents, not only for a person and a toxic relationship, but also the family unit as, somebody moves on from one of those relationships. That's kind of her jam in her practice, and she'll tell you more about it in a second. So I'm going to interview her on some things that I think everybody needs to know if you think you might be in a difficult relationship, or if you're a friend or a loved one of somebody who might be in it, because we all have friends, right, that might be in a relationship we think is unhealthy. So Nina is going to speak a little bit about how to maybe approach somebody who might be in one of those types of relationships. Legal disclaimer, courtesy of the Florida Bar. Don't rely on anything here as legal advice. Get your own attorney, probably your own therapist. Otherwise, use your common sense, and we hope this is helpful. What will come afterwards is a recording of this, so you have a chance to watch it, go replay it, and we'll also send you some links to resources about Nina's practice, as well as the law firm's resources. We have a bunch of books that you can download for free, videos on everything under the sun about the divorce process, and there'll be some links to other webinars we do usually about once a week on all topics related to divorce, separation, and trying to improve your life in general. So without further ado, Nina, maybe take a moment to briefly introduce yourself, and we'll get into the content here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure being here, and thank you guys so much for inviting me. Like he said, my name is Nina Batista. I am an LCSW. I'm a psychotherapist with a practice in Boca Raton. I am certified in treating survivors of narcissistic abuse, or the legal term coercive control. I do specialize in working with complex trauma, so anything that involves any sort of relational trauma, what that could be romantic, familial, collegiate, it doesn't matter, any sort of relational trauma I specialize in. I do work with ages 13 and up, so also with children that are going through, the parents are divorcing, maybe the mom is divorcing an abuser, and the children also need that support, because I do believe in treating it as a holistic, right? Everybody needs that support, not just one person. That is me. I have my private practice there. I also do have an online coaching program to help women heal. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I'm excited to be here to talk a bit more about coercive control.
So, coercive control, hidden abuse, that's what we're talking about. And, just to start out, what is coercive control and why is it a form of abuse? Let's set the record straight on all this stuff.
Yeah, so coercive control is an ongoing pattern of controlling tactics inflicted by a perpetrator to exert dominance over a victim and essentially deprive that victim of autonomy. Coercive control is essentially stripping somebody of their sense of autonomy. So that even looks like, telling them what color nails they can get painted. I personally believe from the studies that I've done is that coercive control is the basis of all domestic abuse. It is somebody who's trying to exert power, right? Someone who wants to essentially be in dominance.
How does coercive control manifest in relationships? How does it appear?
When we think of abuse, we almost think of overt, someone yelling, someone screaming, maybe physical violence. However, with coercive control, physical violence is not the defining characteristic. It is based on psychological abuse, a control of time and space. The perpetrator might isolate the victim from their supports, right? Because it's a lot easier to manipulate and abuse somebody when they're completely isolated without a support system to be able to rely on. They are going to use gaslighting to essentially distort their reality. So what happens is when you're with somebody who you feel safe with, who you think you're in love with, right? And they're telling you that your judgment is incorrect. Well, you start to believe that, and you start to rely on this person and you think that they are the person that knows the truth, right? I don't know how to make decisions now. So they can do this by isolation, right? We said separating from family and friends and coworkers. So the perpetrator might not allow the victim to work, might make a fuss when she wants to spend time with her friends or her family. They package it as like, I care about you, right? And this is the covert part. They might be like, oh, I just want to spend so much time with you. And it looks all romantic and lovey-dovey. However, what we see is that they're actually isolating them from things that make them who they are. Intimidation, it could look like verbal threats, stomping, slamming, throwing things around. They might hurt pets. They might drive really fast. Things, again, that are very covert. It doesn't sound like abuse in just a simple sentence, but it's all of these patterns of behavior that we notice. It's a way to intimidate and control the victim.
I can tell you firsthand, just doing initial consultations in our divorce and family law practice. I'm a divorce lawyer. People will say things like, they have a curfew. I mean, my wife's my law partner, a very strong person, but if I gave her a curfew, if I survived the day, her mother-in-law would take care of me. And if she didn't, my mom would knock me out. But it happens. And people have times where they can't go out with their friends, grown 50-year-old women who've raised, kids that are thriving in college. It initially astounded me to hear that type of stuff, but I just, from what I see, dealing with people who get divorced, maybe that's a weird segment of society, but it's a lot more common than people think in the 5 years post Me Too movement even.
It is, and it sounds so, when you hear it without being trained, because to the naked eye, it sounds so absurd, right? Like, what do you mean you're 55 years old and you have a curfew? This is really common, right? I had a client who, she came in and she was extremely dysregulated because she couldn't figure out what she should wear that day. And what she said to me was like, my ex-partner would tell me what to wear. And if I wore pants instead of a dress, he punished me to the point where I don't know how to dress myself without somebody else telling me what to wear. And that's how insidious it really is. It goes down to taking your autonomy of how to even dress as an adult. And the intimidation and fear tactics they use is so intense to the point where victims become paralyzed, right? I don't know what to wear today, a dress or pants. So it's so sad, it's so tragic, but so important that we're talking about that.
So Nina, how does coercive control ultimately affect the person who's really the victim here?
Well, complex trauma, right? Complex trauma. So essentially it can impact them in various ways. Physical ways like homelessness, addiction, joblessness. It's very common that victims might have suicidal ideations. They're going to feel very frightened. They might not trust anybody else because of all the gaslighting. They're not even trusting their own sense of judgment, let alone other people. So, I love working with attorneys, especially because I think a lot of victims can show up very mistrusting, and some professionals might even deem difficult. But how can they not be difficult after they've just been abused by the person that they loved, right? Is there anything more daunting than saying, oh, my husband of 15, 20 years was actually abusing me the whole time, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important to kind of take that into consideration.
Just the serious effects of a coercive control, toxic type relationship, Nina. Why do people stay in these relationships?
A really good question. And what happens is entrapment, right? Entrapment due to coercive behaviors. A lot of them are maybe financially dependent. I heard, a lot of my clients, the partner tells them they don't need to work, they shouldn't be working, or they'll mask it as, we want you to be a stay-at-home mom to take care of the children. But now they're also being financially abused because now they have to ask permission to even pay for a cake for their kid's birthday. Like I had a client, for their 7-year-old son, she had to call and ask. She was at Publix and it was like a $15 Publix cake. She had to ask permission. He caused a scene. It was a whole thing, right? So to the point where they don't even have their own sense of income because they're being controlled. The intermittent reinforcement also causes victims to forget about all the abuse. So what is that intermittent reinforcement? They're not abusive all the time, right? They provide the little breadcrumbs. You might hear a victim say, well, he's not all bad. It's not bad all the time. And to them, they genuinely believe that because they're being brainwashed. They don't remember all the negative sides because that's what our brains want to do to protect us. We don't want to know the reality of the situation because it's very bleak. So let's try to spin this narrative to make me feel safe. Okay, it's not bad all the time. It is parallel to like an addiction, right? Just like someone who struggles with alcoholism struggles with not being able to pick up the bottle, even though everyone around them can see that their life is going down a rabbit hole. We're like, why can't you stop? Well, the same thing with a victim. That person is like the bottle, and there's nothing more addicting than a maybe either, right? Someone being like, okay, I'm not. And I personally think humans are the worst form of drugs because a bottle can't lie to you, but a human can, right?
That's a statement right there.
Because, they're a mirage. They can say whatever you want, right? And it's really easy to say words and to believe them. I think society also puts this pressure on people, right? I think a lot of dating coaches, even movies, they say, love, we need to fight for love, right? We need to fight to make this work. And in a way, there is some validity to that. However, in coercive controlling relationships, it's not, because you're being abused and it shouldn't be that hard. You can't be in a relationship with somebody whose main focus is trying to punish you and control you. That's not a relationship, right? That's a dictatorship. So I think there's a lot of factors that come into play.
That's interesting stuff. And yeah, I could go off on a tangent that I really won't about the Disney movies from 20 years ago and how it primes, mostly little girls to think about relationships. And on one hand, it's a fairy tale and it's a cool story. And I mean, anybody who's a parent, their kids love to watch that stuff. But on the other, it kind of sets up an unrealistic view of relationships in the world. And at least Disney's kind of changed, lately. But I'll stop rant now about what your kids should watch. Nina, we're talking about coercive control and hidden abuse in relationships and how it manifests and how bad it is. But, you and I are both results-driven people. We don't want to just highlight a problem with giving a solution. So for those people that are experiencing these types of abusive relationships, what's your advice to them to start turning things around and making positive change?
Absolutely, right. And I think the first step is bringing awareness, and really bringing awareness to yourself on what sort of relationship am I in, or what sort of relationship is my loved one in, and doing some research on what is abuse. What are abusive relationships, and really taking a lot of documentation, because again, in these scenarios, you are being gaslit or your loved one is being gaslit. So it's difficult to discern truth versus, what maybe your abuser is telling you. So gathering as much facts as you possibly can. And 100%, you need a therapist through this. Somebody who is trained, someone who is well-versed, who can help you really see this for what it is, and help you decipher between reality and what your abuser is attempting to brainwash you with. So those would be my 2 suggestions up front.
And for people who maybe they've been in one of these relationships a very long time. A lot of my clients have been married for decades. Usually they're getting divorced in their late 40s, early 50s, maybe even later. For those people in these long-term, sometimes covert abusive, sometimes overtly abusive, toxic relationships, what's your best advice for them if they've determined, hey, I think I want to leave this relationship? It can be, an overwhelming concept. Where do they start?
Again, I think it depends on the situation, right? Assessing for safety. I do know in some of these situations it can be lethal. So definitely, again, speaking to a professional, again, Nina Batista, I am certified in this, but being able to reach out to your support system, if you do have that, any friends or family that that are safe being the imperative word here, that you can have that conversation with, talk to them, say, hey, I'm feeling unsafe, right? The more support systems you can get, the less lonely you're going to feel, which is what the abuser wants you to. So definitely gathering that support, making sure that you have a safe way to leave, and again, speaking to a professional to help you navigate that.
And I have a lot of clients that they're in one of these relationships, but it's even more complicated because they have kids. And what many of these, mostly women, usually end up thinking is they have to stay in the relationship because because of the kids. If they get divorced or separated, their children are going to be harmed by it. You're an expert in this stuff. You work with, children, especially in their teenage years. I mean, what do you say to all that?
That is an incredibly common fear that keeps victims stuck. However, studies suggest that no, actually, they're going to be abused regardless. If you are in a coercive, controlling relationship, you have to think that the children are going to be abused by the abuser, right? And you leaving that relationship and gaining stability and gaining tools is actually the most beneficial thing you can do for yourself and your child that they can have to basically counteract the trauma that they're going to endure. Right. And you can be that. You can't be 100% safe and stable in a place that keeps you stuck and sick. Right. You can't do that. So I think the best thing for women in here, moms, I get it. It's so terrifying, but give yourself the best shot of being the best mom and version of yourself so you can be there for your child. And that looks like leaving this relationship and gaining some stability on your own.
I know we have people that are listening to this, aren't the person that's in one of these covertly abusive or toxic relationships. So for those out, I guess really to sum it up, like what's your advice to people who are, friends or a loved one of a person who's in a coercive, controlling, toxic relationship that want to do the best they can to help?
Absolutely. It's very sad to see someone that you love or someone that you care deeply about be in this situation. And I think someone who is a survivor or a victim, just knowing like, hey, I love you and I'm here for you could be so empowering and so impactful for that person to know, hey, there's someone here that loves me and is here for me regardless. Reminding them that, I'm here when you want to talk about it. I am safe. I'm here for you. Acknowledging that you love them, just for them to hear that because they're being deprived of that, and knowing that somebody out here loves them, is the safety, hopefully might trickle some or turn on that light bulb to be like, you know what? This isn't love, what I'm currently experiencing, right? This person over here, that support might actually really love me and maybe I should lean on them. So I think just reminding that person who is the victim that you love them and that you're here for them is very crucial.
Is it of any use for family and loved ones of somebody in a toxic relationship to tell the person, hey, I think your relationship is bad for you. You should consider moving on. Does that ever affect change?
It's a really difficult question to answer because it's so case by case on wherever the person is, right? How deep in the trauma bond. I think it could be really beneficial, for instance, like a podcast like this, if they were to play this episode for them, just be like, hey, something interesting that I heard. You relate to this? And maybe just play it in the background. And maybe that individual might hear, oh, wow, check. That's my relationship. I don't think it's necessarily harmful. I do think you have to ensure that we don't want the abuser to hear that someone's coming in and saying, hey, you might be being abused. So, creating that sense of safety is imperative when you share this information.
That sounds like great advice. And I mean, I've just heard people, usually it's a parent, sometimes they'll even come in and have a consultation with myself or one of my partners, or it's a sibling of somebody in one of these relationships that I just get to know through kids stuff. And yeah, they want to say something. They're worried about getting cut off by the person. It's definitely pretty complex. But I mean, I kind of end on what you're saying. Probably maybe they send them, a recording of this, or there's, other material that's helpful out there, and see if it hits its nerve. And it's a tricky balance, or maybe even go, book an hour of time with you and talk about it more, something like that. And I guess kind of on that note, for people, Nina, that are listening to this and they're resonating with what you're saying, I think maybe you could be a help to them or a loved one. I mean, tell us about, yourself, your private practice, the ways that you help people through this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do see individuals. I have a practice physical space where I can see individuals in Boca Raton. I also do offer virtual sessions. So if anybody's in the state of Florida, I can offer therapy for them on coercive control, narcissistic abuse, or any sort of complex trauma. I do see individuals, again, 13 and up, case by case. If the child is very mature, I'm open to seeing them. But going into younger than that, it's a whole different sort of therapy. It's more play therapy. I also do offer an online coaching program specifically for women. So for women who, are aware that they're in this abusive relationship, that want to really fully understand and gain clarity in what happened to them, gain a sense of community, because I offer a confidential space with other survivors, other female survivors that have endured it, so they can have that sense of community, clarity, and also confidence in who they are again, learning who they are, that they don't have to be in this relationship, right? I actually called it Finding Me After We, because I find it imperative that we discover who we are outside of this relationship. So, I'm really, really passionate about helping women heal from this because it's so unfortunately prevalent. So yeah, I do have that private practice and that coaching program.
What's the best way for them to get in touch with you if they want to follow up about individualized help?
Yeah, so if you want to follow up with some therapy, my email is hello@NinaBatistaCounseling.com. I also have an Instagram, my professional Instagram. It's at Nina B Counseling. My website for therapy is NinaBatistaCounseling.com. And then for my coaching program, it's NinaBatistaCoaching.com. So those are, the links, my Instagram or my email, should you have any questions or want to book a consult. I do offer that as well, a 15-minute free consult to discuss if, your situation is something that I can help you with.
Maybe this is more for my knowledge, but do you ever work with people who are going through the divorce process on, helping them stay grounded and kind of on the right perspective as they do that?
Yes, I work really closely with some attorneys, right, helping educate them on coercive control. I can do consultations with other professionals as well to really identify it. And I absolutely do work with women. Most of my caseload right now are women who are going through the divorce process. That is when I think they need me the most, and unsure, to help them be able to be stable and grounded, because your abuser is going to try to continue abusing you through the litigation, through the entire divorce procedure, unfortunately. Post-separation abuse is very real. Unfortunately, just leaving doesn't mean it's going to stop. Most of the times they actually amplify their abuse tactics. So, and personally, I think it's imperative that victims are working with the therapist to ensure that they are feeling safe and supported through this process.
But just because you do work with people going through divorce, Nina, for those that might be thinking about it, do you see any patterns of what's usually happening when somebody who's in a relationship where they're experiencing narcissistic abuse, this coercive control? What are their husbands or their spouses in the divorce? What's it like?
Through the divorce? Well, so normally it's interesting, right? Because a lot of times the abuser will show up as very charming, very cool, calm, and collected. And the victim usually shows up as, I'm going to use unstable, emotionally dysregulated, anxious, irritated, angry. Unfortunately, what I've seen is that a lot of abusers will use the victim's clear trauma symptoms as a way to say, oh, she's an unfit mother. She's unstable. So that's also another reason why I think it's imperative to be working with a therapist, as like myself, to help them learn tools to help regulate their emotions so they can show up effectively during the court proceedings. They do utilize different tactics, like, for instance, financially, I know lawyers aren't cheap. So they try to go through that process, right, through litigation, filing for more motions just to continue on and on and on. So they might try to, I've had a case where the abuser was having, finances offshore. So the alimony, they kind of got screwed in that sense because they had hidden finances, right? Child support, right? Now your abuser never showed up for your child. Now all of a sudden you're getting abused. Now they all of a sudden they want 100% custody. And it's like, you don't even know our kid's blood type. Why do you want custody of it, right? So, I could go on for hours about this, but these are just some of the ways that
I can just say each one of the things you say is probably happening with one of my law partners right now on an active case. And just my advice, besides look, I have lawyers that understand the stuff if you can afford it. My firm likes to think we do, but there's a lot of great attorneys out there. Is to be working with somebody like Nina, for me, preferably before the process starts, to learn more about how it happened, understand, how you might be triggered in one of these difficult divorces, because in my experience, these people usually just amp things up as an attempt to control the proceedings in order to get you back to them if that's to their advantage, or to weaken your bargaining position if that's to their advantage. So I really think it's imperative to be working with somebody like Nina as you go through the process, but also before. Don't put important changes off indefinitely so you can be the professional when you go through it. You got to make a change at some point. But that's just my shout out to Nina and the services she provides and others like her. I feel it's a must do if the resources allow for it. But I want to be mindful of Nina's time. So what we have set up is a chance to ask her questions, or if you have questions from the legal side, you're welcome to ask them.
When adult daughters have grown up with a narcissistic father that has endless funds to manipulate and alienate them from their mom, they have no idea that they have been brainwashed and abused. How can I help my adult daughters who are 22 and 26 years old? And then, do you see clients by Zoom? I am in Boca. One daughter is in Virginia. The other one is in London.
Okay. First, I want to say that I'm sorry that you are experiencing this. That must it's awful. It is really awful. And this is what they do. They try to alienate your children from you as a way to punish you and to control you. They are adults. Like the question about can I see them over Zoom? Absolutely. I can absolutely see them over Zoom if you want to reach out to me to book a session. But how do I help them? What I usually work on with and what I call protective parenting, right? Protective moms is what I work with. So basically, showing up as the complete opposite from your abuser, showing up as respectful, showing up as consistent, showing up as someone with values and integrity. And what we really want is, it's not necessarily going in and saying, oh, dad did X, Y, and Z. This is awful, right? No, it's showing them what actual love and respect looks like. And children are I know they're adults now, but they're going to be able to see, okay, what's right and what's wrong, right? What feels okay, what doesn't feel okay. And what we really want to do is plant seeds for them to be able to discern. Okay, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel uncomfortable. Maybe what dad's doing isn't okay. Maybe this isn't what love is. And it's a slow process. It's not going to happen overnight. And we don't want to spook them by saying, hey, right, dad's abusive, right? We don't want to do that. That's parental alienation. That is confusing for your children, even though if they're adult children, we don't want to talk badly about their parent. But we can do the only thing we can do is essentially show up as completely different. So I hope that subtly answers your question. It's a loaded question, but...
I mean, I'll just say the person highlights an issue that I tell people about, and that's they think sometimes, hey, I have to stay in this for the kids. They don't want to end the relationship. Let me just get the kids out of high school, which turns into let me just get the kids out of college for some people, which turns into let me just wait until the wedding's over. And what I've seen through clients at different stages in life, and Nina, you may or may not agree and want to hear your experience with this, is the stuff, it's always going to continue with these people as long as they're walking the earth, which, we don't control. So, they're really the best time for you to get out of one of these relationships is, usually as soon as you're ready. Now, look, like if your kid has 2 months left of high school, maybe it makes sense to wait to graduation, but, this stuff never stops. So you're never going to find a great time because they keep doing the same stuff when the kids get older, just to control them and control you, because that's who they are, whether they're straight from hell or it's just part of their wiring, which could be probably a separate podcast to debate that's never going to change in my view. I don't know what you think on that.
I couldn't agree more, to be honest. And I think something that a lot of parents tend to neglect is that kids are very perceptive. They pick up on these things, right? They see moms being abused. They see daddy as saying mean things and harsh things. And, I think something that a lot of moms tend to forget is that by staying in this relationship, and you're teaching your kid that it's okay that, dad calls me names or dad berates me or dad does X, Y, and Z. And then your kid's going to grow up to believe that that is what a relationship is. And they might enter that sort of relationship, or they might become that person because they think it's okay. So the best thing you can do is to leave, to show that your kid that is not love, that you and your child deserve something better, because you do. right? All of us humans were all born with our birthright to be loved unconditionally. And you definitely deserve that, and so does your kid. So staying for the kids is actually more harmful. I believe that wholeheartedly.
Let's go with the next question here. And everybody, by the way, you kind of came on more recently. I've seen the numbers go up and down. If you have questions for Nina or myself, whether it's more from the therapist to answer a question or a question for lawyer to answer, put it in the question and answer box or the chat. We've got a few questions that came in by email or on sign up, and we have one more live, but we'll stay to the questions are answered or for a little while longer. So now's the time. Put your questions in the box, but I'll let Kyla ask the next one here.
Okay, so this one I think can be answered by both of you, which I think will be actually very interesting. The question is, how do you leave safely?
I was taking on me. I'll answer it first. How do you leave a controlling relationship safely from the lawyer's perspective? First start with be practical. And I think part of being practical is if you're able to talk to an attorney that deals with this stuff for your exact situation and exploring what is practical. So if you want to leave one of these relationships and you're concerned about safety, there may be protections that you can get wherever you're living that deal with things like a restraining order. And when those restraining orders are entered, especially if your spouse is a person who can't afford to be arrested, they will respect that restraining order. I have found, at least down in South Florida, while law enforcement might not be quick to go and do many things, when somebody's violating a restraining order, they will act. I can speak with this from personal experience. On Easter Sunday, I was shocked to see on my street a SWAT team for the first time. And when I really found out what was going on later, it was somebody who violated a restraining order, and that drives it in. So there's that. Second, if there's not kids, and you really practically look at, do you need to be in the same home with this person? And if the answer to that is no, and if resources or other people can allow you to get out, sometimes it's best to just orchestrate physically getting away from a person. You can, and if where divorce fits into this doesn't really affect things much, because if you're going to get divorced, almost everything can happen with you not being around. And depending on where you live, half the court stuff's still on these Zoom meetings, just like this. So a lawyer can do about everything. You don't have to stay for the divorce. A lawyer can walk you through, does it make sense to file for divorce before you leave? Sometimes there's financial reasons, sometimes there isn't. You want to grab certain things before you go, and then you time the stuff for a time to where you're least likely to be confronted. And, those are, I guess, the biggest things that come up. You just have to be practical about it. If you don't have resources, there are, in South Florida, certain domestic violence shelters, women's shelters. And we're using the women, because I just seem to see that more, but men go through this too. So there are resources depending on where you're living for that available too. But that's what comes to mind from a lawyer's perspective. What do the therapists have to say?
That's pretty much, I would same thing. From a safety perspective, the local DV shelters can help you create a safety plan. They can also help with resources, financial resources or whatever it may be. My first go-to would probably be that. Ensure that you're safe, tell people that you do love and that you trust, so other people know that you're planning on this. You have the sense of support system is crucial, right? Someone that you trust, so God forbid something happens, somebody is aware. But yeah, just like you said, I would, same thing really.
One that I thought of, so I'll ask the question. And Nina, if you haven't dealt with this or it's not your thing, just let me know. But I have in my law firm and my law partners have dealt with a situation that we find to be very difficult, because you have this control going on, and then we inject religion into the situation. And we have found, and especially more of these strict congregations, people to where as they're leaving the type of one of these relationships, they get the pressure from the church, which might be their only social network. And it's very challenging thing, because not only is there all the dynamics of leaving a relationship that's absolutely abusive, the legal stuff, and just the life is changing stuff, but then you throw on, a real support system that in some cases doesn't appreciate what's going on because they don't know what's happening behind closed doors, and adds an extra layer of challenge. Any advice for people in that type of situation?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question actually, and I know it can get really tricky and murky when we add religion in there because that is someone's individual beliefs, and
Mhm.
I don't want to ever like stomp on somebody's beliefs. And working with victims, there's this intuitive feeling where you don't feel safe, where you don't feel emotionally safe, whether or even physically safe, right? If there is physical abuse. And I think it's really imperative that you trust that because there's a reason why you're looking up, abusive patterns of behavior. That's not something normal that people just do on a random Tuesday, right? You're looking this up because you feel like you're experiencing this. And it doesn't matter who this person is, you do not deserve to be abused. So I think, reminding yourself that you do not deserve to be abused. If the church doesn't really understand what you're going through, again, reach out to a professional. I do think working with somebody who really fully understands coercive control and covert abuse to help you really that you are a victim, that this is something that happened to you and that you don't deserve this and you can get out safely. So, trust your sense of gut, even though your abuser is telling you not to. I know you still have that little voice and go with it. If you feel you're unsafe, there's probably a chance that you are unsafe. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm curious about that because I find that is one of the more challenging situations to deal with. And by no means am I suggesting that it's the fault of the congregation or that because some people in any form of organized religion are more likely to have this. It's just it becomes tricky to mesh the religious values, the need to get out. And so thank you for answering my question. I won't add any more. We'll let the others ask, but I appreciate that. It just helps me be a better lawyer. I think we'll go with the next one.
Sure. So this is a two-part question. So part one, Nina, do you take insurance? And part two, what if the spouse who is also an attorney controls finances and knows you want a divorce and will not let you access marital funds to retain one? Threats of war, in quotation marks, if there is an attorney involved.
So I think the second part is for Chris more, but I do not take insurance. I am all self-pay. However, I do offer a super bill that you can submit to your insurance for reimbursement. The reason for that, I just want to say, is that I've had abusers in the past want to weaponize my client's mental health status. They can subpoena me and take the records. So with self-pay, it offers a protection for my clients. So I really write very, very, very basic things like client discussed family conflict. So if I do get subpoenaed, they can't weaponize that. So that's the reasoning.
If I'm getting divorced and my husband is a difficult person, and a lawyer maybe, and he's cutting me off from access to money, and I need money to hire a lawyer, and he's telling me it's going to be war if you ever leave me. What do I do? There's some practical things to do here. Number one, talk with a lawyer of your own. Many of them have, you pay for an hour of their time. A lot of the really experienced attorneys, you're gonna pay to have like a personalized meeting with them to go over specifics. If not, there's things like this where you can basically get answers on the spot. And I'm glad you're taking advantage of our question and answer webinars. Practically, most people can get enough money to hire an attorney by going and applying for a credit card. If you're filing joint tax returns, you probably will qualify for a credit card in your own name. You can set up a PO box to go and get that done where it's not sent to you. If you don't have relatives that can help, most people are surprised to see what they can qualify for. And before you stop and think, oh, well, of course the lawyer is going to say, go get a credit card so I can pay the lawyer. Well, you can't have a magic button to make somebody do something. And, if there are finances that are at play in the divorce, and this is the reason to go talk with a lawyer about things, just so you get a holistic idea of what might happen in your divorce. Odds are, if there's money to be divided, you'll be able to pay that credit card later, make minimum payments as you go through the process and not be in a point of financial strain. Another solution, and you definitely need to go through it with a lawyer, is looking practically, are there joint assets or how are the assets held? And if there are joint assets, sometimes the thing to be doing is a very carefully choreographed start of the divorce that involves withdrawal of money and filing of divorce petitions. And this is where you have to talk to an attorney that's in your area, because certain counties in Florida have these orders that come out that can really hurt people in these situations to where once the divorce starts, you shouldn't be withdrawing marital funds and you have to go into court to get permission to access money. Going to court in a divorce with somebody like this, especially an attorney, is going to cost money and make the whole process more expensive, which is no good. So sometimes we'll have people take a bunch of money out right as the divorce case is starting to avoid those orders. In certain situations, when one person just holds the money in their name alone, depending on the facts, we can go and do account freezes. And, some of the banks will honor those. Sometimes we need to get court orders very fact specific. I've received 2 death threats in my law practice. They both came after I did that. But you know what? Both of those people settled their divorce quickly because boom, their money was locked up. We had the people. We had good legal reasons to take that approach. So for some people, some of those solutions are there. For other people, sometimes it's a matter of timing. They may have the ability to start becoming more financially self-sufficient over a period of time. That can be good for a lot of reasons, including they may not be able to depend on the abuser helping them after the divorce, which I think is a good thing anyway, to be more fiscally independent. So there's that. Sometimes you can get a job, save some money, or get credit that you might not have had otherwise. And if you're listening to this, you're probably waiting for me to say, and the magic easy button solution is right here, but it just really doesn't exist. So as much as you can be practical about it, it's great if you have family that can help. Otherwise, you try to get the money from the sources that are available or see if you can qualify for lending or make the money yourself. There isn't a magic solution. The courts, in theory, have a solution to where when the divorce starts, you can go in and have a hearing called a temporary relief hearing, to where you can ask the judge to make your husband pay for your legal bills. The practical problem with that process is, number one, many of the judges are stingy. They do not want people to get huge sums of money thinking that it will cause lawyers to be enabled to draw out the divorce. So, if you get a judge saying, oh, your lawyer can, get $10,000 from your husband in a divorce that involves dividing $5 million, well, that really doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. There are many attorneys that won't be able to represent you in that situation. So the law solution that is there for most people is not a very helpful or practical one in many circumstances. So it's definitely something to really strategize, think out, and look at. And I think at the same time, and maybe Nina can add to this, having the mindset to see your husband's threats for what they are. And what I tell my clients when they don't have the benefit of working with a great therapist yet is to get one. And if they don't or they can, and it's me giving the advice, I work very hard throughout the representation to help them understand that these types of threats are going to come. You can minimize them from not talking to your spouse as much as possible, which is not always practical if you're living in the same place or have kids, but see it as much as you can. Develop the mindset to see these types of threats as what they are, which are pathetic attempts to control you. It's like if you're into sports, there's a Hail Mary. It's like the last-ditch effort to get something to happen. See it as pathetic and see yourself as reaching the point to where you have, awareness to see it for what it is, which is a threat to control you that if you get the right training, you cannot be triggered by as much. So it's complicated, I feel, for this person. And, you make them a lawyer and it makes it harder. But I have found a lot of attorneys, unless they're a litigator in family courts, they end up making bad decisions in the divorce. So for this particular person, they should know that too. But Nina, I don't know what you think on this. How does this person deal with these types of threats in the divorce?
No, I totally agree, right? They are just throwing things at the wall to see what stick. It's a last-ditch effort to try to control you. I work with a lot of my clients. You can't negotiate with a terrorist. There's no point of even having this conversation because, again, their main goal is to assert dominance over you, is to assert power. No matter as delusional, distorted, insane it sounds, they're going to say whatever they can to intimidate you. So to not engage, again, working with a therapist and also an attorney, as a licensed clinical social worker, we're taught in grad school years ago, but education is prevention, right? So make sure that you know your rights, right? What's going on? What is the legal statute of what you can do, what you can't do, because they're going to make things up just to make you feel intimidated. So educate yourself is crucial to protect yourself.
Well, Nina, thank you for all of your time and time leading up to this. Everybody, these things don't just happen without people taking the time to get prepared. And Nina's done that from her practice. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, and you can feel free to sign off that are more legal, we can get to them here just while we have everybody on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Again, it was a pleasure, and we will speak soon.
What are the rights financially for stay-at-home parent who's not working when they're leaving a long-term marriage? So it really falls into three main categories, maybe four main categories. There is dividing the assets. So no matter how much your spouse has generated income more than you, in Florida and a lot of other states, you're still entitled to, at a baseline, half of the assets that accumulated during the marriage. So a lot of people think, hey, I didn't work, I don't get to share in the money. And by the way, this is true whether your name's on the account or not. So you're entitled, number one, to half the assets, which sometimes by itself solves most of the problems. There are some exceptions to this stuff, but generally that's what you get, half of the money. Number two, you're entitled, probably in this situation, if the other person is working, to what's called alimony. And we have videos that do deep dives in that. I could speak 30 minutes on alimony alone, but it's something that in theory allows you to pay for your reasonable expenses of life after the divorce. And there's certain limitations on how much you can get, but that's one of the things that is available that's, under the law, you're entitled probably to receive. Number three, child support. If there's kids and people are making, you're going to get child support. It's based on a state formula. Look, it's not going to change your life, but every bit helps. And especially for a couple of kids, it can add up. Child support's mainly based on the income of both people and how much time they see the kids, and things like, are there daycare expenses and things like that. And number four, there's some relief available to you to have attorney's fees and costs paid for by your husband, at least eventually. So those are the four things that come in mind and can kind of equal the playing field.
Thank you. Next question. I am in an abusive relationship of 15 years with 2 children, and I want to leave with custody of our children to protect them from him. What do you suggest?
So if you're in a long-term relationship, you have 2 kids, married about 15 years, your husband is an abusive type person, you want to get as much custody of your children to protect them from your spouse, what do you do? First, talk with a lawyer who knows this stuff in the area where you live, because the way this stuff is dealt with, if you ever do go to court, is by a judge. There aren't juries in family law, and each county's typically only going to have a couple of judges, sometimes even only one judge, and a lawyer experienced in your area is going to generally know how that judge views things. So step one, learn your rights. Step two, depending on what a lawyer says, if it looks like you have a case to really limit the other person's custody, you can do things in the case like take depositions of the other person, get proof together of how they are harming your kids. And, in these coercive control type situations, you can get what's called a social investigator or a guardian ad litem in certain situations appointed by the court that can do testing and come up with more medical opinions of what is going on with your spouse's behavior and how it is adversely affecting the children. Do understand that in Florida, the default in the law, the starting point, is that each parent has equal time with the kids after the divorce. That's where the law says judges have to start. They have to have evidence that equal time is not in the best interest of the children to do anything differently. And there's a lot of controversy about that new law, but it is what it is. So you have to really take stock in what are the trade-offs between spending money on a legal process to really fight, more than 50% of the time with your kids, and how does that affect your kids? And depending on where you're at, it may or may not be worth pursuing that. The person asking this question, I think, has a 15-year-old. Well, you might look at, with a 15-year-old, are they going to be driving in another year? What's the plan for them in high school? Are they going to be mostly kind of doing their own thing or so busy with sports and activities that it's not as important anymore? Does it really make sense to go through that litigation? For some people, absolutely. For some people, maybe not. So you have to look at all that. Also, I'd recommend talking with a really good therapist. We had Nina Batista on here who deals with kids and going through this stuff. Find out how the divorce might affect your specific children. A lot of the studies do suggest that even if the your soon-to-be ex-spouse is kind of a demon from hell, as long as they're not physically violent, that your kids are probably going to be capable of having healthy adult relationships and the kind of the normal great life we want for our even if it's a nasty divorce and they're with the other parent half the time and they're just a terrible parent, but you and your time with the kids sets positive examples. And during that time, about 30% of it in a really just, they call it healthy attachment with the kids. And the first time I heard this, it was from somebody like Nina talking to me, and I interviewed them in their office, and I kind of thought it was a bunch of crap, quite frankly. If there's a difficult divorce and, my client has the kids half the time, the other parent's terrible, that the kids are going to be fine if my parent's basically just a good parent that's close to the kids. So I went and did my own research, and I read several different studies that say the same thing. And since then, each time I get to talk to a therapist that's experienced in working with children, I always grill them about that, and they come up with the same result. That's what the professional backed research and the clinicians say. So for some people, there's a little bit of an adjustment to learning about that concept. And when they hear about it, maybe they realize, hey, an expensive legal battle may not ultimately be worth it because my end goal is for my kids to grow up as healthy adults. So it's a personal thing to deal with. And you really have to look at what are the pros and what are the cons of going through a quote unquote custody battle in the court system. Sometimes there's reasons you need to do it. Sometimes there's reasons to where it's best maybe not to be done. How do you leave an abusive relationship safely if you have an infant child? It's a challenging situation to confront. You have to recognize that right off the bat, especially if it's your first child, because then you have all of the challenges of motherhood for the first time. I think most of the parents of the world who've had a couple of kids, they're a veteran and a pro by child number 2. It's harder with an infant just because there's more unknowns, and it's scary. So recognize it for what it is, which is a tricky situation. I think the best thing to do, besides getting the legal advice as to whether there's legal remedies of protection, and to kind of really talk through this probably in like an hour-long conversation of exactly what to do, is see if you have a safe place to go, especially with family, can support you. That is the number one thing I usually try to have my clients do, because number one, they're in a safe place, especially if it's with their parents or siblings or really close friends. Number two, if they can get help with the child in that situation, also, it's an added plus, because an infant is it's exhausting. It's round the clock care all the time. And to be able, even if for just a little while, to be able to have somebody that you trust to help you care for the baby in one of these life transitions. It's even if they're there just for an hour a day so you can take a shower and breathe, it's going to be helpful, much more so than finding the nearest hotel to go to. A lot of people who ask this question are concerned about, okay, I'm leaving, I have the child, am I kidnapping my kid? And talk to a lawyer, because where you live, it may be different in Florida. As long as you don't cross state lines, you're really not going to be, in most situations, doing anything that would get you charged with a crime. I tell most people, if the abuse is there and it's documented, you got to put your safety first. If somebody's going to cause a problem in the court system later, for my clients that have been legitimately abused, have a really good faith reason to be afraid. Maybe one day they have to go to a court hearing and testify in court as to why they did what they did, doing the best that they could with the information available to them at the time to protect their child at a really difficult time in their life. And, A judge might agree that what they did was reasonable. Maybe they don't. In most cases, when I've had this issue, if a parent of a really young child goes away with the kid because there's evidence that they thought it was the best way to keep them safe, and that seems to be a reasonable thing to do, then most of the judges don't punish that person. And when I say punish, I mean, usually the worst case you can get is having to have the other person get makeup time for the time they weren't around the child. And sometimes that's a year or two later. So you really got to look at exactly what's going on, talk with a lawyer who is, active in going to court in the county where you're living, experience with the judges that would be dealing with it. Make sure you're not breaking the law. Most of the time, that's not an issue. Put safety first. The legal stuff gets dealt with later.
Thank you. Next question. I have been alienated from my child for a year. What steps should I take?
I think the best place to start is by talking with a really good lawyer and a really good mental health counselor. If you don't have a divorce situation going on, usually starting with a really good can practically do a lot of help, but you might want to talk to an attorney at the same time. There is they call it a protocol, the mental health field called reunification therapy. It's a form of therapy that's very specific, and it is designed to reestablish relationships between parents and children in situations where the child has been alienated against the other parent. Also in situations to where you have like a soldier deployed that's off fighting a war, doesn't see their kids for a few years, or parents that have been incarcerated. And it's a pretty specific way to rebuild the relationship, even with a child that is initially very resistant. If you have younger kids, usually they ultimately come around easier than maybe like a 14-year-old that's been told by their parent that the other parent had an affair or something. So that is a great way to help rebuild the relationship. Just individual counseling and counseling with the child can be pretty helpful. If the other parent is on board, which usually they're not in these situations because they're the one that caused the problem, and alienating a child against a parent has to be one of the most evil things anybody can do. But if the other parent is involved and they realize, hey, maybe I did some things that weren't good and I want to fix this because I see my kids suffering, family therapy, where you have a therapist who understands this stuff, who can, talk with everybody and as a group and sometimes individually. I have seen that rectify a relationship that had been non-existent between a child and his father for over 10 years. I thought it was just a relationship that could never be restored, and researched our law firm. We have a website now, staymarriedflorida.com, big pro therapy now. This case of seeing the reunification of this child and his father, who'd been out of the life for about 10 years, is what got me to believe therapists actually do anything positive to begin with. I used to think therapy was a bunch of crap until I saw this happen. That turned around my perspective, and I've stayed in touch with the parent of this child. Now, this was over 10 years ago, about 15 years ago, and the relationship has continued to grow, and it's just been tremendous to see. So the therapist stuff can work wonders, but I don't want to set unrealistic expectations in many of these situations. While therapy is there, courts can order therapy and order certain things. The fact of the matter might be it's going to take some time, possibly into adulthood, for you to have the relationship that you want to have with your child. So even though this might not get fixed quickly, and you may need to accept that, you should be doing things that give the relationship the best chance to pick back up. And this will depend on your child, their age, their circumstances. See somebody like Nina, or there's children's therapists, and we can refer you to some if you want to contact our office that will work with parents in these situations. The parent will tell the therapist what the child's like, and they'll give them strategies. But as an example, if you're not seeing your kid, your daughter's on the high school soccer team, well, go watch the games, be there, wave at her. She might talk to you, but maybe after she might not think anymore that, her mom or her dad's an evil person. And you might get that lead in. Or when they go off to college a year later and you contact them, they might pick up the phone. You have to be present as possible. Don't be afraid of rejection. You might get it, and I've seen it. Some of the worst cases I've had are the parents to where the kids just don't talk to them, and they just have to keep trying to minimize being negative and trying to make the child feel guilty for not talking to them. That usually doesn't work. That's usually not productive at all. But they have to keep at it, keep showing up, be able to consistently be rejected, and see that is over time probably going to work. Most children do come around, especially when they're adults. Sometimes it takes 10 years, and it's the hardest thing to say as a parent myself, but you do have to understand that while you need to keep trying, you should come to the reality of the situation may not change. It might not change for a while. It is possible it will never change. That's unlikely, but put in the effort, get professional advice, both from a lawyer, but also from a therapist on how to deal with the unique needs of the situation and your child, but don't lose hope.
Thank you, Chris. Last question. My children desperately want to change the parenting plan with their dad after 8 years of suffering a very strict plan that only satisfies dad and makes everyone else miserable. What can be done about this?
So if you have a parenting plan, that parenting plan, it's been in place for 8 years, 9 years, a long time. And it's really just one of these parenting plans that benefits the other parent. Kids don't like it. It's hard. Maybe it's outdated based on the age of the kids. What can you do about it in Florida? Well, there is a process called a modification of time sharing. And that process, if you meet all the criteria, allows you to change a parenting plan if there's a substantial change in circumstances. This is what the law says. That's material and in nature, and the best interest of the children would be well served by the parenting plan changing. So it's possible under the law, if there's been a change in things, it's not working for the kids, and the kids would be better off if the parenting plan was different, for a judge to change the parenting plan. Ultimately, though, the thing to really think through in this situation is not can you change the parenting plan, but should you try to change the parenting plan? And that's the thing to really talk through with a lawyer. And why am I saying this? When they're a difficult person, if your ex is a narcissist and you want to kickstart another court case to change the parenting plan, well, some of these people are evil. They then go and try to mess with the alimony you're receiving or the child support, or they'll countersue and try to get more custody themselves. And looking at your situation from the big picture, usually it's good to get a lawyer who really understands this stuff, that is dealing with the should you modify, not can you modify. Be wary of a lawyer that's like, yeah, definitely, I'll take your case, let's go. You really want to walk through, is this the best thing for you and the kids? Because sometimes with certain people, the process in life that comes as a result of restarting a court case or re-engaging with a toxic person can leave you and the kids worse off than if you just follow the darn schedule that you have already. But sometimes you got to make a change, and the reasons for changing outweigh the problems associated with it. And, when you have another parent that's an agreeable person, which most of the time people who ask this question don't ask, it's very easy to change a parenting plan. You all can just agree to what is best for the kids and have it approved by a judge, which they almost always do. So when people are agreeable, the process is simple. It's just when they're disagreeable people that sometimes the process is not worth going through. So everyone, I hope these questions and answers and the material was helpful to you. We do these webinars usually about once a week at this time of year. This was the first time we brought a therapist on to do something like this live. So if you have feedback for us, it would be greatly appreciated. If this has been helpful to you, please share the information with somebody else. And, we always appreciate 5-star Google reviews. So we appreciate that too, if you're comfortable doing that. So thank you for everything. I hope it's been helpful, and catch you next time.